How are you guys doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, and today is December 16th, a Monday here, just a week of kind of schedule we'll be running on for Christmas. For the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll be running on some sporadic episodes. I'll be on here probably every Monday and Friday except Christmas week. Christmas week there'll be no shows, at least from me, but this week and the week after that there'll only be shows on Monday and Friday and potentially one more during the week. And I'll make sure to update you guys as that goes and as we get closer to those dates. But for this week it'll probably be on Monday and Friday. So we're going to recap what happened over the weekend on today's episode as we usually do, and also look ahead to tonight with two Monday Night Football games on tonight's schedule. The Falcons taking on the Raiders and the Bears taking on the Minnesota Vikings again. That'll be closer to the end of the show. But we're going to go over the Eagles game, the Packers and Seahawks game, while also talking about the Bills and Lions game. So all that is coming up on today's show. Before we get started though, I want to remind you guys, if you guys have any questions or comments, or just any opinions you'd like to share on any of our topics, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and insight is always valued here at GSMC. We always love when you guys add more to the conversation, and that way just make it more interesting, more interactive, and just more insightful, I would say, as well going forward. So if you guys want to do that and get involved with the show, there's an easy way that your message can stand out and that I can see it and read it on air. That way would be the new Super Chat feature. You're able to use the new Super Chat feature just by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, I can read it, and we can take the conversation to different places based on what you guys add to the show. So again, hit the Super Chat button, hit the $ at the bottom of the chat box and get involved. We always love what you guys are thinking. We always love to know what you guys want to say, so that's an easy way to get involved with the show and just let your voice be heard basically on all these live shows. So go ahead and do that. But now that we are through that and we can get to our first topic of the day, looking at the potentially the most entertaining game of the weekend, I would say, another 40-plus point game that the Bills are involved in. It's back-to-back weeks now for Buffalo that they've been in 42-plus point games. They won one this past weekend, and they lost the first one to the Rams a couple weeks ago. But I would say that this win just yesterday was a lot more significant than the loss was to the Buffalo Bills. And if you guys remember, the loss was pretty important just because, it extended the Chiefs' lead on them for the number one seed. And, looking back on it now, that race would be a little bit closer, but the Chiefs still have that 2-game lead on the Bills. But I thought this game was a bit more important and just a bit more significant just because you went into Detroit, regardless of any injuries and things like that and who the Lions were missing, they were just steamrolling over everybody. And this game was dubbed as a potential Super Bowl preview, and it did not disappoint. And despite all those injuries, Detroit kept it close. But for the idea that Buffalo went into Detroit, the number one seed in the NFC, and beat them and almost scored 50 points on them, I thought that said a lot more than, their loss to the Rams did a couple weeks ago. So after the loss, and really Buffalo looked unstoppable on offense really in this game, as the 48 points would show, right? But this win was a 48-42 victory for the Buffalo Bills to, make up for that loss, like I said. And not only that, and how impactful it was, to go up against Detroit. They snapped the Lions' 11-game winning streak and all, really, but I would say all but lock up the number two seed in the AFC, especially after the Steelers lost. And now the Steelers have 4 losses, while the Bills still only have 3, I believe. Yeah, the Bills still only have 3, and I believe they still got to play the Patriots twice and the Jets once, so they're probably going to be favored in all those games. So I would say that they're probably going to win out and be locked into that number 2 seed just based on how the Steelers, their schedule shakes out and everything like that. So this win was important, definitely, for Buffalo. And on that note, we can't talk too much about this game without mentioning the MVP, I would say, in my opinion. Josh Allen, another insane game to just strengthen his MVP case if there was any doubt about it. If there was anybody that had any doubts about Josh being the MVP, he just keeps putting out performances like this. 362 yards, 2 touchdowns passing, 2 touchdowns rushing. He added 68 rushing yards as well, and he continues to do everything for the Buffalo Bills. But in that same sense, it feels like he does almost everything, but it still kind of feels like a whole team effort, right? You see Josh, and he has the ball every single play, but it never feels like he's like doing too much, if that makes sense. He's doing a lot while almost feeling like he's not doing too much in the same sense, if that makes sense. At least that's how I see it. Because in these games, James Cook's doing a great job. Ray Davis is doing a great job. Ty Johnson's, I think he was one of the leading receivers in this game for the Bills. Yeah, he was. He was the leading receiver with 5 receptions for 114 yards. And then you get Keon Coleman back from injury, Dalton Kincaid back from injury. They were involved a little bit. Amari Cooper, obviously, too. Khalil Shakir is another one. Josh does a great job of spreading the ball all over the place. And that's why I guess I would say that it doesn't feel like he's doing too much while he's putting up these insane numbers like he's doing. So he was obviously a huge portion of this win. But for the other side, for the Lions, they now go to 12-2. Still the number 1 seed in the NFC, but with the fact that the Eagles won yesterday as well, that also brings the Eagles to 12-2. So I don't know exactly what the tiebreaker is right now, but that gap is closed now, right? They have the same exact record. The Lions still have that tiebreaker, but the Lions still have a tougher end of schedule than the Eagles do. The Eagles still got to play, I believe, 1 game against each NFC East opponent, while the Lions still got to play in Chicago, in San Francisco, and at home against the Vikings. So a much tougher end of 3 games here for the Lions than it is the Philadelphia Eagles. So we'll see if after all season, where the Lions have been the dominant team, whether or not they give it up at the very end. But it's kind of looking like that because of all these injuries that they keep stockpiling. Not that they want to, obviously, but it's kind of ridiculous how they're stacking up these injuries, right? Yesterday, it was no different for the Lions. 3 more key pieces went down for them on defense and 1 on offense. On the defensive side of the ball, Ali McNeil, their defensive tackle, was injured. He tore his ACL, and he's out for the rest of the year. Their defensive back, Khalif Dorsey, and their other defensive back, Carlton Davis, as well. Both of those guys didn't come back into the game. They're also believed to also be done for the year. I don't know the exact, diagnosis yet, but that's what Dan Campbell said after the game. Then I mentioned somebody on offense, David Montgomery. He wasn't really involved yesterday because he was having some knee problems, and then it was revealed today that he actually has a sprained MCL, and that I'm sure he's expected to miss a couple weeks. I'm just going to check here to make sure, but those are all starters, obviously, not to mention guys like Aiden Hutchinson, already out. Malcolm Rodriguez is already out, one of their linebackers. Barnes, another starter, is out. Alex Anzalone has been out for a while now. All those guys are starters, and, that they've been missing. And now you add all these guys on top of it. It's definitely, it just feels like very unfortunate, obviously, but super unlucky for a team that's just been dominating the entire year. And actually, here it is. According to Adam Schefter, Lions head coach Dan Campbell said that running back David Montgomery will undergo season-ending knee surgery, and Dan Campbell said they are going to miss him. So there's another one down for the Lions. David Montgomery goes down, and now he's out for the rest of the year, which again is insane. And then you start bringing up these long-term questions about the Super Bowl, and you build a team so well sometimes, but then the most important thing about, this time of year and, the season overall, and then the extensive conversation about adding more games to the regular season, and it all really comes down to how healthy you are, really, at the end of the day. And the Bills, I think, showed that. They're one of the healthiest teams in the NFL, and then in the next segment, we're going to talk about the Eagles, and it's the same thing for them, and it's no surprise that it looks like both of those two teams are playing the best football as of right now. And in terms of health, the Lions would be right up there, but all of their starters are quite literally all injured. Now, right, I mentioned Ali McNeil. He tore his ACL. He's done for the year. Khalif Dorsey, Carlton Davis. Already on the injured reserve, they have Khalif Raymond, one of their wide receivers. Marcus Davenport, one of their pass rushers. Aiden Hutchinson's been out for a while. Alexander Zaloni has been out for a while. Derek Barnes, another starter. Malcolm Rodriguez, another linebacker who's a starter. And, that's so many guys that at some point you just can't do much, right? And it's unfortunate that it happens right now with 3 games to go. And now they're going to have to rely solely on their offense. And it's very talented and capable of putting up points, obviously, like they just did. But talking Super Bowl, talking going up against the Bills, or maybe even the Chiefs or something like that, or the Eagles, that's where I kind of sway my vote a little bit against the Lions. And I was very dead set on the Lions on winning the whole thing, but at some point, just watching the game yesterday for the Eagles, they have so many guys that on defense, especially when you're matching up directly and you have so many starters out, it's just unfortunate that all their players are out. So I am swaying away a little bit from the Lions, unfortunately, for their Super Bowl chances because of simply the health factor, which is definitely a crushing blow, but we'll see. I mean, they're going to have to play near perfect for the rest of the season talking about the bigger games. So we'll see how that pans out for them as we move along closer and closer to the end of the season. But we're going to go to a quick break right now and talk about the other NFC powerhouse. The Philadelphia Eagles got a win yesterday over the Pittsburgh Steelers, and now they continue their quest to try and steal away the number 1 seed. Are they going to be able to do it? Especially now that A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts look to be on the same page. We'll be right back with that segment right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue talking about the weekend. A very eventful week for, I would say, the majority of the top NFC teams, because in this game, in this segment, it was no different. Talking about the Philadelphia Eagles, the Pennsylvania Classic, as I've heard it been called, went to Philadelphia this time around, as it usually does in Philadelphia, as they face the Pittsburgh Steelers. After this game in Philly, the Steelers now go to 0-11 since the last time they won in the city of Philadelphia. Yesterday, it was no different. Obviously, the Eagles won 27-13 and extended their winning streak to 10 games now, and are now tied for first in the NFC, in the entire NFC, the conference overall, with, like we just talked about, the Lions losing. It puts the Eagles equal with their record at 12-2. But on the other side of things for Pittsburgh, because they're also, in the playoff mix as well, it was always going to be, a long shot to win this game because of the injury to George Pickens and facing a very impressive Eagles team overall, but their defense as well was insane yesterday. And, with the loss, now the Steelers are 10-4 and are only one game ahead of the Ravens for the number 1 spot in the AFC North. And, of course, with this crazy schedule coming up for a few teams, 3 games over the next 11 days for the Steelers, for the Ravens, for the Texans, and the Chiefs. Now their next game that the Steelers are going to play is, of course, the Baltimore Ravens. A pretty much deciding game for the division, because if the Steelers win, they're going to win the North. But if the Ravens win, it opens up a huge door. The entire door is open for them to take the division because of how difficult the Steelers' end of schedule is, and the Ravens, it probably can't be as hard. I mean, I'd have to look, but I can't imagine it's as difficult as the Steelers, but I will give it a look here in just a second. But as we continue talking about this, it's kind of weird because the Steelers lost yesterday in pretty convincing fashion, but because of how all the other results, finished off, at the end of Sunday, the only good thing that came from yesterday for the Steelers was that they somehow secured a playoff spot, even though they lost to Philadelphia, because the loss to the Colts and the loss to the Dolphins meant that the Steelers could win or lose, and they'd still be in if those two teams lost. And the Broncos beat the Colts, and the Texans beat the Miami Dolphins, not only securing a playoff spot for the Texans with that win and the Colts loss, but also with both of those teams losing, the Steelers are also guaranteed to be in the playoffs. Now it's just a matter if they're going to be the 3, 4, or probably 5 seed. One of those 3 seeds is going to go to Pittsburgh. Probably not 4, probably 3 or 5, I would say, because Houston's obviously in there. But really the main story going into this game, obviously, was what we mostly talked about the week leading up into this game, with A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts, Brandon Graham even as well, talking about their frustrations with the passing game and how it was being handled and things like that. It all got pretty messy and just all kind of blown out of proportion a little bit. I understand how it was blown out of proportion just from a standpoint that, it was only a 1-week thing, and now, you look at them and it looks like nothing ever happened. But also in the same breath, for something like that to just pop up randomly, it's like the last thing you need for a team that's 12-2, right? You know what I mean? Like, a team's doing so good, and they're healthy, they have a pretty easy end of schedule, and the last thing you need is for them to kind of be fighting amongst each other. So that was kind of what raised some eyebrows in leading up into this game, but it all went like pretty much up into smoke, like we kind of predicted, right? Because this game was only going to go one of 2 ways, right? It was either going to be that the frustrations continued, that Jalen really wasn't throwing AJ the ball, and that those frustrations, those, antics were going to boil over again on the sideline or wherever, right, in yesterday's game. But that obviously didn't happen, and the other option happened, right? They were going to go off. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith were going to have a great game. Jalen was going to have a great game through the air, and it was going to look like nothing ever happened, and that's what we saw yesterday. And if you look at the numbers that Jalen and really A.J. Brown put up in particular, it was, a great day through the air for them. Jalen Hurts had 290 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and a tush-push touchdown, while also adding 45 rushing yards. And A.J. Brown having one of his better games in recent memory with 8 receptions, 1 touchdown, and 110 receiving yards. They were just too much for the Steelers because, you look at those numbers and you're thinking, like, the Steelers probably got destroyed. And they kind of did, but, they got so many weapons. And it's a case like that with them, with the Bills, and even the Lions a little bit on offense. But the Eagles just got so many things to worry about. And the Steelers really looked like they were just trying to not let Saquon destroy the game. And I think he had one of his lowest days through the ground in recent memory as well. I think he finished with like 60-something yards yesterday. So it was pretty clear that the Steelers wanted to stop Saquon, and they were going to live with AJ or Devontae Smith having a pretty decent day, which they did. But it's all of that to say that that I don't think was so lopsided as it might have looked. Of course, the score looks like, they doubled the Steelers score, right? Obviously, but that was without George Pickens, right? And that's one of their best players, obviously, on offense, if not one of their best players, but definitely the most impactful player. The one that, you can miss Najee. You can have Jalen Warren. You can have maybe Calvin Austin not play. Or maybe even Pat Freiermuth not play. And it might still look the same if George is out there. But once George goes down, as we saw yesterday, the entire thing just looked off. It looked like they really hadn't had any real offensive momentum going into this game. And it was a little bit worrying, to be honest, because I heard somebody say it today that pretty much summed it up perfectly, was that the Steelers without George really have nobody else to game plan around, right? There's nobody else that really kind of keeps you up at night thinking about like, oh, I got a game plan for this guy so he doesn't really wreck the game for us. Without George, they really don't have that kind of guy, right? Obviously, Najee Harris is a decent player. Jalen's a decent player. They're a decent, duo. Pat Freiermuth is having a pretty nice, season overall. But really after that, especially the wide receivers, nobody's really scaring you for you to go over there and like double them or, make sure they don't wreck the game. And it showed there was a lot of, just bad drives. They really struggled to get a first down there through the first couple possessions. And, the way the game started, I thought this was not going to go well, that the Steelers were probably going to lose by like 20 plus points. But at one point in the game, it got pretty close where the Eagles were up 17-3 with AJ and Devontae Smith up early, like I said. But then Pittsburgh kind of got a little bit of a lifeline towards the end of the first half with a touchdown by Pat Freiermuth that brought the score to 17-10, right? And then the Steelers managed to get a last, second field goal there to end the first half. So, despite how lopsided it looked, it was only a 4-point game in the first half. And then, to start the second half, the Eagles only got a field goal. So now it's 20-13, right? The Eagles, for a couple possessions, haven't really gotten anything going. They've punted, they've hit a field goal, not that big of a deal because it's only still a one-score game. And it felt like a little bit to me while I was watching the game that the Steelers were about to potentially turn the corner. If, they scored on this drive or they got some sort of points, they could have at least kept that momentum going. But to start that drive after the Eagles made it 20-13, the Steelers hit a pretty nice flea flicker, and it got them like almost 40 yards. They hit another play to Calvin Austin that got them nearly like another 15 to 16 yards as well. So now the Steelers are sitting at the Philadelphia 26. You're thinking at least a field goal should be okay, right? But after a toss play, Najee Harris just drops the ball, he fumbles, and the Eagles pick it up and they recover it. So at that point, I'm thinking this was the drive for the Steelers, right? They were either going to get a touchdown and really make it a game. A field goal kind of kept them in it. Or, the worst case scenario was they turned the ball over. And, of course, like things always, turn out, the Eagles took that turnover, they got the ball back, and they scored a touchdown, now making it 27-13. And the Steelers punted again one more time, and then the Eagles closed the game out with a 10-minute and 21-play drive through Saquon mostly to close out the game. And it's nothing to take away from the Eagles because their defense was amazing. Their defensive line really just completely erased anything the Steelers were trying to do in the running game. They were getting pressure on Russell Wilson. They were playing two high safeties all day. So not only do they have nobody to worry about, in case of doubling, now they really can just patrol everything because they know no one's getting back there. They really don't believe any of the wide receivers can beat their corners one-on-one. So now they have two guys sitting back there, really not allowing anything to go over their heads. And they were forcing the Steelers to kind of methodically put together long drives to beat them and see if they could actually beat them without George Pickens. And obviously that didn't turn out as the Steelers would have hoped. They looked outmatched, outmuscled, and despite all of that, they had their moment there with that drive, but unfortunately, Najee Harris fumbled, and that just talks about the theme, the narrative with this Steelers team, right? The Eagles are a great team. They're playing some of the best football of the season so far because they are healthy and they have talented players, so they're playing really good. But for the Steelers, with or without George Pickens, they're theme, their narrative is that they can't have turnovers. They can't hurt themselves. They could potentially put together some bad drives like they did yesterday, but they have a really good defense that they're fortunate enough that they, can get the ball back for them. They could stop teams repeatedly more often than not, but you can't have turnovers hurting yourself. And in the games where, Russell Wilson might throw an interception or he fumbles like he did against Cleveland, it makes it extremely tougher for this team to win. And the margin of error is so small. Even with George Pickens there, it's so small. And then when you take George out of it, there's almost no margin of error, right? And the Steelers, were doing everything possible to win this game, with TJ Watt forcing Jalen Hurts to fumble, recovering that one. Cooper DeJean fumbling, the Steelers recovering that one. They weren't able to capitalize on it. And on top of that, they hurt themselves with the turnovers. So this Steelers team, I do believe, is good if they can play the way that they want to play, right? Clean football, running the ball, taking little errors, little risks, and, living and dying by that. We've seen them win games by only field goals. We've seen them win games by like 20 or at least multiple scores if they play clean, right? If they're not turning the ball over, they have a chance. I truly believe that, and I think we saw it yesterday. But, we saw that turnover, and I'm not saying if the game's 2020, the Steelers definitely win, but you don't really know what's going to happen at that point, right? The Eagles are definitely a more talented team, and I would say they're playing better right now. But, the turnover definitely was a huge point in the game. And for them to still kind of be that close without George, I think, there is more to this team than I think a lot of people will give them credit, the day after. So, it was a good game regardless, but the Eagles were definitely deserved winners at the end of the day. So, with that being said, we're going to move on to another topic. And speaking about deserved winners, we're going to go to Sunday Night Football and talk about the Packers really handling the Seattle Seahawks on the road. But we're also going to touch on a much larger topic with the Seahawks and looking at the injury to Geno Smith and whether or not they're in danger of missing the playoffs altogether. That is coming up right after this break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
All right, guys, we are back here on the show to talk about last night's game and a pretty interesting matchup between the Packers and the Seattle Seahawks just because of obviously some more playoff implications and talking about seedings and division winners and things like that. It was no different in this game. And, Sunday Night Football concluded with even more, just craziness in the NFC, really, in terms of the playoff picture because Green Bay went into Seattle and came away with a win. The final score was 30-13, but the Packers, not really playing for, too much like movement or divisions or anything like that because I don't think the Lions or even the Vikings are not going to win the division. So the Packers are 10-4 now. So they're still 2 games behind those two teams. So if they continue like they are, they're probably locked into the number 5 seed anyway. But they did recover from the loss to the Lions, right? Because of how harsh it was and how, hard done they probably felt, losing by 3 points. Probably feeling that they probably could have won that game. They were able to go on the road again and beat a very game Seattle Seahawks team. Again, for the Packers that weren't really playing for too much, but that's not really the story for the Seahawks because they had a lot really on the line and on their play in this game because A win would have been huge. It would have kept, their lead over the Rams in the division and would have kept the Seahawks as the leaders of the NFC West. But now, because of the loss, the Seahawks are now tied with the Los Angeles Rams with the same exact record at 8-6. But what's so important about that is that right now, if the season ended today, the regular season ended today, the Seahawks, with the same exact record as the Rams at 8-6, the Seahawks would be out of the playoffs because the Rams beat them the first time around, and that is the tiebreaker right now. So the Rams, as we speak, right now currently, are the number 1 team in the NFC West. They are the number 4 seed as of right now, and the Seahawks find themselves as the number 8 team, 1 spot out of the playoffs. So they went from the number 3 to number 4 seed to completely out of the playoffs now with the loss. So nothing's done or set yet, obviously, because they have the same record. But it is very disappointing for the Seahawks because they were on a 4-game win streak. They were feeling good. Their offense was playing better. The turnovers were really limited, and their defense was creating turnovers, bringing pressure and things like that. And it was looking very impressive, but in this game, I thought that you really saw kind of like the difference between some of the real contending teams and some of the teams that can give you a fight but might not just be there yet. And I think the Packers made that distinction with their win, kind of putting them with the Eagles and the Vikings and the Lions, I would say, whereas the Seahawks are still like a team with the Buccaneers or the Rams or even the Washington Commanders, right? Not bad teams. It's not a huge difference in play, but the teams that are able to get these close wins, I think that's really where the distinction lies. And the Seahawks unfortunately weren't able to get that last night, but even though that's all, pretty bad for the Seahawks to kind of lose the number 1 spot right now, it's not the biggest concern because the Seahawks also did not finish yesterday's game with their quarterback, Geno Smith. He left in the third quarter with about 7 minutes left in that third quarter after a right knee injury. It was kind of weird where the Packers player, I'm pretty sure it was Ajarian Cooper, who kind of went low on Geno to tackle him, and his knee kind of got caught up in the turf kind of in a weird maneuver, and he was holding it a little bit. He was hobbling. He was obviously frustrated on the sideline, and he wasn't able to come back. So that's still a huge concern, right? Because of all the talk about the NFC West and trying to be, the number 1 team and get into the playoffs, none of that really matters if Geno's not playing. If we know that Geno's not going to play the rest of the year, the rest of the worries and concerns don't really matter because they're not gonna make the playoffs without Geno playing. And I thought that was pretty clear yesterday with the way Sam Howell played. And I don't want to dump on him too much, but you can tell why Geno's obviously playing and why they have a much better chance of playing better and going somewhere this year because of the fact that Geno has been playing pretty well and Sam Howell just kind of got tossed in. But it's definitely the biggest concern as of right now, based on that. So I'm gonna try and see if there was any more developments on the Geno injury. As of right now, I'm not seeing anything. I know he's supposed to have an MRI or some scans today, but I'm not seeing anything more recently on him. I'm sure it'll come out, if not later tonight or potentially tomorrow. So that's obviously a concern. You don't want it to be a long-term thing, but head coach Mike Macdonald said that the structural look of the knee looked to be pretty intact, so that's some positive news. But in this game, when Geno got hurt, the score was already 20-3 in favor of Green Bay. So once Geno got hurt and you knew that he wasn't coming back, the game was pretty much just a wash away at that point. Mostly because of how the Packers were playing, basically, but still, without no Geno, it was always going to be tougher. And this win was actually the Packers' first win in Seattle since 2008. Still, with that win, they still sit as the number 6 seed as of right now, not the 5th seed. Like I said before, the 5th seed is the the Vikings right now. The Packers would probably be locked into the 6th seed if I were to guess as of right now. But going through this game a little bit more, it was really a lot to do with just how well the Packers played, I want to say again, because the Packers scored quickly and often, in this game. They scored on their first 2 drives. Seattle got back on the board with their second drive of the game once they kicked the field goal to make it 14-3. But then Green Bay added those 2 other field goals, like I said, and then it went into halftime. And at one point, actually before halftime, Seattle had a really good drive going, a very methodical 12-play, 63-yard drive going into the half, right? But once they got into the red zone, unfortunately, we talked about those turnover problems and how the Seahawks had really cut down on them. Well, they popped up yet again where Geno threw an interception in the end zone during that drive, and they went into halftime 20-3 instead of 20-6 or 20-10. Because of that interception, they came away with nothing, and that was pretty demoralizing, I thought, going into halftime. And then to start the second half, it was mostly just a back and forth, both of the teams punting the ball away. And then after both teams exchanged a field goal, Josh Jacobs actually fumbled to start the fourth quarter, right? So with that, the score was 23-6 at that point when Jacobs fumbled. And then Seattle scored another touchdown with Geno Smith obviously out of the game at this point. So now it's a 10-point game, and Seattle forced, another turnover on downs. So it's still a 10-point game. They got the fumble recovery and then a turnover on downs. I'm still not confident, but at least it's something. But my optimism pretty much died there because Sam Howell threw an interception to Ejarian Cooper about 2 to 3 plays after they got the ball back, and at that point, Green Bay scored one more time, and then the score was 30-13, and that would turn out to be the final score. And first, on the side of the Green Bay Packers, I want to say just overall, this is the 4th game in a row that Jordan Love has not thrown, any turnovers, no fumbles, no bad interceptions or anything like that. And, that's great from, his standpoint, obviously, but also I thought the running game continued to, really be the driving force for this offense, right? And specifically, Josh Jacobs, obviously. He's scored for the 5th game in a row now. And I think really everything they do sort of in a way is just played off of how he's doing, or just, is another step off of what he's doing, right? Once the running game gets going, now they're able to open up a lot more passing lanes, getting a bit more creative with the passing game, and then they build on the runs that they have, right? They build on the kind of runs that they scheme up. They keep it fresh. They don't always, run the same outside zone or inside zone or just power, don't just have a power running game. It's very varied, and they do a good job of, kind of mixing it up with Josh Jacobs or Eric Wilson coming in, and then just like I said, after that, the play action's able to get going, and the passing lanes are a bit more open for Jordan Love. So I thought the way that they've really shifted the focus to Josh Jacobs and the running game as the first priority, and then, kind of getting Jordan Love involved, I thought it's worked wonders for them now, obviously, going forward. And it's a little bit like Philadelphia because of the threat of the running game and how efficient it is. They have all the pass-catching options like Philadelphia does with Jaden Reed and Christian Watson and Dontavius Wicks is the other receiver. Tucker Kraft, their tight end as well. And Romeo Doubs. They have a bunch of options like the Eagles do. Maybe not the same level as AJ, but they got 4 to 5 pass-catching options that are very dependable for them, on top of a great running game like Saquon in Philly. The Packers have it with Josh Jacobs as well. So, it's those type of teams that really are benefiting from the health and obviously playing better at this point of the year. But on Seattle, the last thing we'll say about them is, that the injury is definitely a concern. I I'm still sticking to the fact that if Geno's not playing, this team's unfortunately probably closer to done than anything else. And it stinks because it feels like you're taking away their opportunity, right, to compete. But it's, the injury bug and the fact that injuries, derail everything, right? It always feels unfair. It always feels like it comes at the wrong point of the season. But it is what it is. Based on that, there's going to be more information coming out on Geno's injury. But even with Geno, the rest of these games were going to be brutal. So that's kind of, fanning my concern for the Seahawks if they don't have Geno Smith. Because even with him playing, they still had to play Minnesota at home, at Chicago, and then finish the year in Los Angeles. And those games were already going to be tough with everybody healthy. And now without Geno, I'm not believing Sam Howell's going to win 2 out of the next 3 games. I'm just not believing it. So, a very rough afternoon, very rough night for the Seahawks, losing their winning streak and finding themselves out of the playoffs right now as things stand. But that was all yesterday's action that we're going to get to. Now we're looking ahead to the 2 Monday Night Football games that we have coming up. The first one is actually in less than an hour at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That's the one that we are going to talk about first, with Chicago taking on the Vikings for the second time this year. That segment is coming up right after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Jumping back into the action here, ahead of Monday Night Football, we got 2 games on tonight's schedule. Again, after a while that we haven't had 2 games on Monday Night Football. They are back. We got a doubleheader tonight, and we got round 2 of the Monday Night Football doubleheader, round 2 of this matchup in the NFC North between the Chicago Bears and the Minnesota Vikings tonight. Part of that Monday Night Football doubleheader. This is the early game that's set to kick off at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC or ESPN Plus for those of you that are trying to watch the game. This is going to be the first one up, and the last game was a thrilling 30-27 victory for the Minnesota Vikings in Chicago in overtime, which was, it had everything, right? That was part of the stretch of games where the Bears, I thought, could have had the opportunity to win all 3, but unfortunately they lost all 3. And that one was probably the closest one that they had an opportunity to win. And, we got this is the second rematch in the NFC North, right? The only 2 other teams to play each other for the second time has been the Packers and the Detroit Lions. And now this is the second time 2 NFC North teams are playing each other again, with the Bears and the Minnesota Vikings. And speaking of the Vikings first, they enter with an 11-2 record as the number 5 seed and on a 6-game winning streak. They are still trying to catch the Lions for the NFC North title. And going back to all the way into the beginning of this segment and how we talked about the Lions losing, not only was it important because the Eagles are now tied with them for the record, but it makes this game a lot more important because the Vikings are also 11-2. So now they head into this game knowing that they could have the same record as the Lions at 12-2 if they win tonight, and still have to play them one more time in Detroit, but they still got one more game going up against the Lions where they could steal the NFC North. And then we could really get crazy and talk about the Lions not even being a top 4 team in the playoffs if everything goes that way for the Vikings. But they already clinched a playoff spot as well, with the Seahawks losing, I believe, as well. So they're going to be in, but they have a real opportunity here to put a lot more pressure on the Lions and maybe even lose the whole division entirely if the Lions, stumble once again over the course of these next 3 weeks. But that's really what the Vikings are playing for. Still playing for a lot at this point in the year, despite their very dominant record. Whereas the Bears, on the other hand, unfortunately, they're at the complete opposite end of, the point at where most teams are still fighting for the playoffs. The Bears are on the complete opposite side, basically, because they're 4-9 right now, and they still are trying to break their losing streak. It's up to 7 games right now. And they just got their butts kicked by the 49ers, 38-13 in the first game after Matt Eberflus was fired. And it was weird because the defense was a bit off as well. For a team that I've been, pretty high on, the fact that their defense is is the more reliable side of their team. I was pretty surprised that they gave up, that big of a, margin and just that many points in general overall. So that was a bit surprising, but, hopefully their defensive coordinator now, Eric Washington, who's calling the plays on defense now since Matt Eberflus was fired, he can have a rebound game going up against the Vikings tonight. But it's definitely not going to be easy, but he has the opportunity regardless, so we'll see if he can improve. But the last time, what's funny about this game, and it brings up the running theme that we've had, on today's episode. We had the injuries and the fact that we're talking about the healthiest and most stacked teams in the NFC. There's no diversion from that, because in this game we got the Vikings, and even though last time, Justin Jefferson was held to 2 receptions for 27 yards, and you would think that anytime he's held to that the Vikings would probably lose, right? It was anything but that, because Jordan Addison last time went off for 8 receptions and 162 yards and a touchdown. And also, TJ Hawkinson added 7 receptions and 114 yards as well. So, when arguably the best receiver in the NFL is really blanketed and isn't allowed to do anything, they still got a guy like Jordan Addison putting up insane numbers. Their tight end, Hawkinson, is also a great tight end, one of the best, one of my favorite in the NFL. So it's like a lose-lose situation in a way, like we mentioned with the Eagles, right? Where the Steelers did a good job of taking away Saquon Barkley, but A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith have monster games, and it's no different here. Justin Jefferson doesn't necessarily have his Justin Jefferson kind of game, but they got Aaron Jones, who goes over 100 yards and scores a touchdown. They got Jordan Addison, over 150 yards and a touchdown. TJ Hawkinson, over 100 yards and 7 receptions, right? It feels like it's too much, and everywhere you look, it feels like you're going to find one mismatch at least, right? You can't cover and match up perfectly, man for man, one-on-one, all throughout the field. It's just unlikely with some of these teams. So that was the story last time. But even so, the score was only a 3-point game. But we'll see how the Bears attack that now, knowing and hopefully learning from that last game, trying to limit everybody and not just Justin Jefferson so much. But there are some pretty big injuries going into this game. A couple for the Bears, and really one important one for the Minnesota Vikings. For the Bears, their defensive tackle, Gervon Dexter, is going to be out tonight. Their other running back, Roshan Johnson, is also going to be out tonight. And Ryan Bates, their center, is also not going to be able to play tonight with a concussion, where the Minnesota Vikings are going to be missing really only one true, big piece that hasn't already been injured. That is going to be Stephon Gilmore, I believe. Yes, he is inactive for tonight. He was not able to recover from his hamstring injury, so the Vikings are going to be without their best cover corner in this game. And I know DeAndre Swift was potentially going to miss this game, but I don't see him as an inactive, so he is ready to go tonight. But Roshan Johnson, the other running back, is not going to be able to play as well. So those are the injuries. A big one for the Minnesota Vikings not having Stephon Gilmore, but it opens things up for Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze. So we'll see if they can take advantage of that. And for the matchups, I just wanted to kind of add something, kind of like what I'm looking for, what I'm hoping to see out of both teams. Instead of, just going over some other things, I just want to point out, going forward with these previews, just one goal I kind of want to see from each team going into these games. So for the Chicago Bears, what I want to see from them is their defense, picking up the slack from last game, right? Because you can't drop off on defense. Their defense is clearly the best part of their team, is the most reliable part. Yes, maybe one performance, could be all right, and that was the 49ers game, right? That was their one bad performance, but we can't have it stack up now. We can't have this team just drop off defensively now that Matt Eberflus is gone. I know there's only 2 games left after this, but, they're important. Obviously, you want to finish them off strong. You want to have a positive feeling going into the offseason and hopefully getting better after this. But their defense is what's kept them in games really the majority of the year, because the offense has been pretty hit or miss. So we need better production from them. We need them to get after the quarterback better and just not have so many just self-harming mistakes, right? Not so many communication errors, penalties, and things like that. Don't hurt yourself, because the other team is trying to do that to you anyway. So try to play as cleanly as possible, and I'm hoping to see the Bears defense kind of rebound from last game against the 49ers. And for the Vikings, what I want to see from them is just being able to finish drives. Finish drives with 6 points instead of 3 points, right? Don't settle for field goals as much. Because they're too good. They're way too talented to settle for field goal after field goal after field goal, right? They got too many weapons, like I pointed out before, to, have that be their thing, right? They're way too good for that. And we kind of saw that efficiency in the early parts of games in the early portion of the season, right? They'd get out to these crazy leads like the Giants, like the Packers game, and, that's how they would win games. And then it kind of stalled out a little bit, like we saw against the Rams and in the first half of the Colts game. But it kind of looks like they're back a little bit to putting up big points and scoring touchdowns like we saw in the fourth quarter last week against the Falcons. So I want to see them, continue that, not just have it reserved for the fourth quarter, but start off, getting a touchdown or two early on in the game, then continuing that offensive pressure all throughout the game, not just in the fourth quarter or in the first quarter. Make it more consistent. That's what I'm hoping the Vikings kind of build on as we go into these games. And just quickly into the matchups here before we get into my prediction. One of the matchups I'm looking at is Aaron Jones going up against this defensive line. Aaron Jones had 106 yards last time, and this time around there's not going to be any Gervon Dexter, one of their defensive tackles, in the middle of their defensive line. So how much do the Vikings try to take advantage of that? How early do they try to establish that running game? And also, with Aaron Jones, not only that, but the pass rush, right? With no Gervon Dexter, are they going to be able to get to Sam Darnold? That's also going to be a huge thing in this game. And then the other one here, I just have the Vikings secondary going up against Chicago's, pass-catching options, right? Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, Cole Kmet, DJ Moore, and those guys. They're all very good. It's a very talented group. And last time, it was a very close game. I know DJ Moore had a big game. And Caleb threw for over 300 yards last time with Stephon Gilmore. Now, he's not going to be in there. So, can they take advantage of that? The secondary is definitely the weaker part of this Vikings defense because their pass rush is very good. Their linebackers are very good. But the secondary is a little bit vulnerable, I would say. So, with no Stephon Gilmore today and the options, I'm hoping to see the Bears take advantage of that because I think they have the advantage in that matchup, certainly, going into this game. But those are the matchups. And now in terms of my predictions, I'm still gonna go with the Vikings. The Vikings will win. I am hoping the Bears defense plays a little bit better, but even still, I I just think they got too much. We saw yesterday with the Eagles. I keep referencing them because it's true. And the healthier you are, the more talented you are, and the more options you have, I think it's just very difficult to ask of that for a defense to stop them so often, especially if the offense for the Chicago Bears is also struggling and, punting or settling for 3 points. It's a big ask. And I think over the course of the game, your defense just gets tired, and that's natural to happen. So with the Vikings being at home and the fact that they're debuting those sick new all-white uniforms, they're not losing in those. So the Vikings are going to win. I just remembered that they're playing those uniforms, so there's no way they lose in those. Those are going to be looking sick tonight. So I'm going to go with the Vikings to win in their all-new white uniforms, and that won't be the last game we have on tonight. We still got one more Monday Night Football game to talk about. That is set to kick off at 8:30 p.m. on the national ESPN channel between the Falcons and the Las Vegas Raiders. So we're going to recap that and preview that actually when we return after this. Thank you guys for joining me here for the last segment of today's show. We got the second game of Monday Night Football that we have to preview tonight on today's show is the game between the Falcons and the Las Vegas Raiders. Kickoff is set to be at 8:30 p.m. This one on the national ESPN, your local ESPN national channel, while the other one is going to be on ABC and ESPN Plus. But it's a weird game because both teams are having different goals in mind. And what I mean by that is, first off, Atlanta, just lost the lead in the NFC South to the Buccaneers, and they're on a 4-game losing streak right now, and they find themselves in a 6-7 record right now in 9th place in the NFC overall, behind the Rams, or actually now behind the Seahawks, and the Washington Commanders at that 7th spot. So it's looking pretty rough. It has looked pretty rough, especially with the game against the Broncos, and then you add in there the Seahawks. The Chargers game was brutal, and now the Vikings game definitely was not doing them any favors. But they got a good opportunity here with the Raiders, traveling to Las Vegas and whatnot. It's a good opportunity for them to get back into shape a little bit, because the way the Buccaneers are playing, as a side note, it's looking very impressive, and now you kind of got to favor them in that division, certainly, because the way that they beat up on the Chargers was not something I was expecting. So it just adds even more to the fact that the Falcons have to win this game. But as bad as things have been for them, and the fact that they need this win, it's definitely not been as bad as it has been for the Raiders, right? Because the Raiders, they're one of those, they're 2-11. Like it's hard to find things to talk about with them other than the fact that maybe they're struggling, right? Or not maybe, they are and have been struggling, but you can't just always talk about that. That's one thing you could always talk about, but you can't just always bring it up. So they're talked about less and less as the season goes on. And it's unfortunate because I kind of had some hopes for them, adding Christian Wilkins to this team, and obviously Max Crosby. And, knowing what Brock Bowers is now, you'd have hoped to have seen a little bit more production from them. But it's been one of those years, right? They're 2-11 now, and they can't even get up to the amount of wins that they had last year, right? They had 8 wins last year, and now they're going to get nowhere near that, obviously, and they're on a 9-game losing streak. And the only teams, funny enough, that they have beaten have been the Ravens of all teams and the Browns, the Browns aren't very good, but the Ravens still, the fact that the Raiders have beaten them is insane. The last time the Raiders won was back in September 29th against the Browns, and that was it. They haven't won in almost like 2 months, which is insane again. But in this matchup, there's some things to know in case you want to kind of get swayed in one way or the other, depending on, I don't know, if you were really having a tough decision on who you thought was going to win this game. In this matchup, the Falcons have won the last 5 meetings between the two, and also Aiden O'Connell is questionable in this game. I'm actually going to check now what the inactives are, because that was before, going into this game. I know he was going to try out that knee that he was nursing a little bit during the warm-ups. But now I'm looking at it, and he is inactive. Aiden O'Connell is not going to play tonight for the Las Vegas Raiders. He's inactive, and it'll be Desmond Ridder or Carter Bradley. I'm imagining it's going to be Desmond Ridder because I don't really know who Carter Bradley is. So it has to be Desmond Ridder. There's no way Carter Bradley is going to start. So it's going to be Desmond Ridder. And why that's important is because Desmond Ridder was let go of by the Atlanta Falcons this season. With the addition of Kirk Cousins, they let Desmond Ridder walk after a very bad year last year. And now, funny enough, as things play out, he is now facing his former team tonight in a matchup that you probably never would have dreamed that would be the matchup between quarterbacks, right? Ridder and Kirk Cousins facing off on Monday Night Football. But that's how funny the NFL really works. And now it just adds a little bit more of a different flavor to this game, I guess, with that little narrative there. But it doesn't really change too much, I would think, right, with the Raiders and Falcons. But more positively for the Raiders, Brock Bowers set the NFL rookie tight end record with 87 receptions last week. He broke Sam Laporta's record from last year for the most receptions by a rookie tight end with 86. He is now at 87, still closing in on extending that lead and that record even more with 3 games left on the schedule. And also, it doesn't end there with Brock Bowers, because Brock Bowers is 67 yards away from becoming only the 3rd rookie tight end with 1,000 yards in his first year since Kyle Pitts, but also only joining Kyle Pitts and Mike Ditka back in 1961, I want to say, was when Ditka did it, and Kyle Pitts obviously did it in his rookie year. So Brock Bowers could be added to some very elite company there in terms of rookie years for these tight ends. But we mentioned the injuries. We mentioned the injury to Aiden O'Connell, but that's not where it ends there, because unfortunately for the Raiders, their best player on their team, Max Crosby, is going to need ankle surgery, so he is out for the remainder of the year. He announced earlier, last week actually, he announced it, so he's obviously not going to play. Their defensive tackle, Adam Butler, I don't see on the injury reserve, or I don't see on the inactives list, so I'm assuming he's good to go. He was battling a concussion, but he has no injury designation, so he's good to go for tonight's game. Alexander Madison is going to be back tonight after missing the last 3 games, and also their defensive back, Nate Hobbs, is also expected to play tonight after being out a little bit with a injury of himself. And for the Falcons, it's only really the only real noticeable, big injury is their linebacker, Troy Anderson. Troy Anderson is going to be out with a knee injury, so he's obviously a big part of their defense, overall. So he's not going to be playing tonight for the Falcons. And like last segment, I talked about what I wanted to see, kind of like a goal for each team. Starting off with the Falcons, what I want to see from them is the fact that, Kirk Cousins, right? It starts and ends with Kirk Cousins. I have to see, and I want to see, Kirk just get back to playing mistake-free football, right? The turnovers are one thing, or I should say the poor play is one thing, but the turnovers and things like that, and the hesitation, the double clutching and things like that, all of that is not who Kirk is. It can be who Kirk is, because then the Falcons wouldn't have brought him in if they saw that kind of performance, right? And I know he was a little banged up with the severe injury, right, obviously, but, the opportunity to see Kirk play a 2-11 team and kind of regain some of that confidence, albeit on the road, is going to be huge for this team, and just getting back on the right track. I don't need to see him throwing for like 304 touchdowns, but just the no turnovers, no hurrying your team, cut down the penalties as well, and get this offense back looking to what it used to look like, in the beginning portion of the season, where they beat the Eagles, where they played a close game with the Kansas City Chiefs, and, they got some pretty impressive wins, both times against the Buccaneers, right, and things like that. We need to see that team, play to that level, and they're capable of doing it with Drake London and Darnell Mooney and Kyle Pitts. He's too talented not to be used, and obviously Bijan Robinson as well. So I'm hoping to just see them get back on track and slowly build up to it as the season ends. And really for the Raiders, I just want to see more of Brock Bowers. Continue to make history, versus a weaker part of the Falcons team, right? The Falcons, their strongest part is their offense, so their defense has been struggling a little bit, and I want to see Brock Bowers just continue to make history, essentially, right? Just continue to show out in the remainder of these games. Regardless if they win or not, I just want to see Brock Bowers play well, and that's pretty much it for them. But now looking at the matchups, right? The matchups I want to see starts and ends with Brock Bowers, right? I want to see him going up against Jesse Bates, maybe Justin Simmons, maybe some of their linebackers, right? Who takes the responsibility of going up against, Brock Bowers and trying to slow him down and, covering him essentially, right? Everybody knows he's the part of their offense that, is the best part of their offense, right? So, who takes on that responsibility? And I'm interested to see how the Falcons game plan around trying to stop him, right? So that'll be pretty interesting to look at. And another matchup kind of goes for both teams, the amount of pass rushing pressure they allow against both offensive lines. Basically both offensive lines going up against the other team's pass rush, because both teams rank near the bottom in terms of sacks, recorded. So there's not a lot of pressure coming anyway, but who gives up more? And the team that usually gives up more sacks in a battle of teams that don't really give up that many, or don't really get that many, I should say, usually end up winning if they record more. So which offensive line will hold up better, and, which one will get, in trouble a little bit more by allowing that pressure coming in. So that'll be a big one. And the last one I just put up here is Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier going up against a defensive line without Max Crosby, without Christian Wilkins, obviously. I'm interested to see how they do, and if the running game is going to completely dominate this game, potentially, if both of those guys are able to get going. But overall, my prediction, it was obviously going to be Atlanta. They have something to play for. They can't miss the playoffs. I think that would really be a devastating end to a season for them, for Raheem Morris, and, what they're trying to build there. So they have to win this game. They should win this game. And Las Vegas, again, isn't playing for much other than one of the top two selections in the draft. So I'm going to go with the Falcons to win, maybe by 10 points. I'll say they'll win by 10 points comfortably here over the Raiders. So that'll be both games. Hopefully we get a couple good matchups on tonight's, rendition of Monday Night Football, and it should be good with both of these teams, or at least one of these two teams in each game, playing for something meaningful here towards the end of the year. But that does conclude it for today's episode. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's show, and please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the Chip Shot Football Podcast, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. If you want to see more of the show, please check out both YouTube channels, the Podcast Network channel and the Sports Network channel on YouTube for more NFL content surrounding the Chip Shot Football Podcast. And again, a final reminder, because of Christmas and the scheduling with Christmas and the holidays, we are going to be live most likely on Monday and Friday this week, and then there's going to be no shows during the Christmas week, and then we'll be back the following week with shows on Monday and Friday as well before we get going again on a regular schedule once the new year hits. So that's all from today's episode. I'll see you guys towards the end of the week, probably on Friday, potentially Thursday, for another episode of the Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit and the coffee ain't hit yet.